Good afternoon. Welcome to my second part of View auto-completion plugin. I did this video last night about exactly this time actually last night, and I hit problems. So I thought, you know what, I'll go back and start again. And I'd hit a problem, and I wanted to explain the resolution for it. It wasn't really in my plugin. It was more to do with how you remount something in View. So um, is everything working? No, it's not because I've taken it down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this site. And first of all, if I update this to B1 point that and publish this, so hopefully we shouldn't hit any problems now. And I can show you. So let me just commit this. What? I'll have to go back to that because it's pushing all the build stuff. Anyhow, I'm going to show you this thing. So I'm going to install the plugin according to what I've got in dependency now, which is 1.110. Okay, so we're up and running now. And so first of all, I've given two examples, and it's all misleading because it was working for me at one point last night and I've not been able to replicate the problem. So this item is set, and apparently with this override true, it will reset this object because it's preset, and it resets it. And on this one, it's, I'm sorry, the other thing I want to point out is when you click reset, all of them pop back with an error. This isn't a problem with the plugin, it's just the fact that they're all called vehicle name and it's a test page, and validation is referring to the field name, which is all the same. So this is why we get this problem. So if I reset this one, apparently it's not supposed to reset it, but it does reset it, and the override clear function on this is false. If we have a look, so by default it's false, so I would just ignore this. It's probably worth I mean, I've left it there because it gives you an example, but it's not working in my demonstration. But sometimes when the object is set, the default HTML5 clear component doesn't work. Whereas by overriding it, it kind of tells the plugin to do its own work. And you may want to override it when you've got complex objects like these. So to demonstrate what I mean, I was on 4. This is validation, yeah. False. Reload it. We've got all these subcomponents like color and country and stuff. So if we reset it, as you can see, all of the color. Oh no, they're gone. They're resetting. Oh. Anyhow, if you have a problem, you can't reset the components. Just set this override clear function to true, and it should hopefully reset the component for you. But what happens is this complex object example of I had a problem with the secondaries drop down that I created from it. So we've got an object called current edit 5. It's got all these elements hanging off of it. There's a country object inside current edit 5, and that's got an ID and a name. And that represents 4.1, this point that we're looking at the moment. So when I click X up here, this also clears, and this was what the problem was. I couldn't get this to clear, although the object down here was getting reset. The actual autocomplete was still showing the old result. So I put loads of stuff into the code trying to fix it, and I made things worse, and 1.18 was broken, 1.19 was working, but this problem was there, and 1.110 kind of reverts on the stuff in 1.19 that wasn't needed and tidies up a few things. But overall, this is really related to how you declare these components for it to work. It's a key element, and I'll show you in a minute. So this is the validation example, and there's two different examples I've given you, and what these points 4 onwards it represents as additional properties, which is something I've added from 1.17 onwards. And additional properties is when you select a vehicle, what will happen is you can see additional properties are being set when you select it. So color is set, steering is set, and and obviously country down here is set as well, which was in this object. Vehicle. You can see countries changed down here, and some of this stuff down here has changed as well. So the difference between 4 and 5 is that 4 has country in its own object within current edit 5, whereas 5 has country within the current edit 6 object. So there's country ID and country name flat inside elements. When we clear it, that country name and country ID clears, and when we set it, it sets it. And the difference between the two is, on 4 additional properties, we've got the flat elements like this, and the remote key is what the remote value for something is, whereas the key field is a local key, and you might have a value. If you've just got a one value or a key, it doesn't really matter what you refer to it, as long as you're referring to the same thing on the other side. So if it's a key, remote key; if it's a value field, it's a remote value. And on this one, on the current edit 5, we've got something called object name country. So it says bind to this object within current edit 5 and map ID locally to country ID remotely and name locally to country name remotely. So current edit 5 .country .id and .name then gets set or read or whatever it is. And obviously this is our 4.1, which is the country part of 4, and 5 is the same additional properties, but you can see here I've not even declared a remote value for these. I've just said key field and value field, because that country ID for the remote value key is the same thing, and value field is country name for remote value. So I don't even, this will become remote value because they're the same. And that is a simplified version of that, but it's flat within this map. So it gives you a way of being able to update multiple things within the same object. Now, in 1.1 something I've released, I think it's an example, example 5, where it returns a promise, and a promise then sets the object. So it's quite similar to that, but whereas you're doing this work locally on this version that I'm showing you, which is example 8, you're kind of getting the plugin to do the work by giving it the additional properties, and then that goes off and binds it, clears it, whatever it needs to do. Most importantly is the clearance of that object. So when the user clicks on, so this is the really important part of having these additional. Even if you have example 5, which is this return promise, I would still recommend you pass additional properties in, because even though the plugin won't be doing the work anymore for you because you're asking it that I'm going to do the work, what is actually happening is it's actually capturing all of that anyway, and saying, well, when the user clicks on reset on this object, also reset all of these additional fields, which is going to be important to you, because if you've got color on the screen as another field, or something that's a read only, the moment they click clear, you want that color to also disappear on the screen until they next select it, because it's not set. So it's really important to have those additional properties set properly as well. And also the other factor about these additional properties. Maybe it's something I need to give more thought to, but I've kind of made a note on it here, which is when you've got this object name like country, country can only reside within current edit 5 because we're only always modeling this object. So we can't say something outside of current edit 5 because, well, we're just modeling that. And in that instance, we would probably use example 5 to say, well, although we've got the remote data of some other thing, update another object dot something. So you may have to overtake at that point. I'm not sure there's anything I can do with that, actually, to be honest. So that would be the way around it. I think that wraps up the video and hopefully gives you an insight. So I wouldn't worry about these error messages. This is just because they're called vehicle name. And the non-validation obviously doesn't do any of that. And also another thing to point out as well, by the time we've now got to 1.110, there's new elements that you can add to it which aren't needed anymore. So for example, in the logic, what it does is enable timeout, set timeout, and enable timeout gets passed to the methods when the methods get loaded up. So by default, the valid is set to do timeouts there, whereas valid, auto completion, if you set a new variable, will set timeout true. So by default, when you go to non-validation and all of the stuff that I've written on the plugin about timeouts, I need to update as well because this no longer uses timeouts. It actually works, and when you do your selection, it also works. You don't need a timeout for the non-validation because what we found was that the VEE validate kind of interferes, and that's why you need this timeout. And this also goes to an own timeout thing that you can set, and you can also override the timeout value. So so timeout period, and by default is 300. If I increase that, and set timeout true or false. By default, this is set to true for valid method. For non-validation method, if you need it, set it to true. Otherwise, it's false. You won't need it by default. If there's a behavior that you notice that's slightly off, so you're doing all this stuff and you can't select it, or you're clearing it and it's not working, you might want to set that to true. Override clear functions, what that does is I'll quickly show you so you understand it. When it's set, when the page updates, something happens. So it's when you've typically related to the search function, and that will be this. And it's saying to it, well, if it's blanked out, blank out everything on the page that's related to that object that was set in additional properties. And it's using jQuery to kind of bind to some random ID that I've set for import class. So by default, it's not on unless you set this to be true, and you can see this in the examples. Override clear function, and as I said, for this one you don't need it, but for non-validation you can have set timeout equals true, which is referring to the other variable that I just showed you. And that's it. That wraps up the video. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it's all made sense. And sorry, before I go, did I explain to you the last bit, the component bit? I didn't think I did. So in how I've got that to work, the secondary vehicle of country to clear, which works in both examples, is the same thing I've followed. So if I show you what I've done is I've added search, where is it gone? Oh, this one. At key press, sorry, oh. At search key, component key plus plus, we've registered a new variable as a page starts up called component key, and that's called 0. And on the very first autocomplete, that should reset everything, or whatever it is, you may have to think about this logic. When the key comes back, although the plugin is not doing the modeling, we're saying when we get the key back, as in when the user selected something, make the key plus plus, or component key plus plus. And then in the second tag or third or whatever it is, we just refer to something called key equals component key, like I've done here. And that tells view to remount that component, and which then makes it all work. This key isn't something related to my plugin, it's more related to Vue.js. So I hope that that makes sense and you understand it. There's nothing related to the plugin, it's more related to kind of remounting the object because things have changed. Otherwise, we was always looking at what it mounted with, and the updated method I messed around with, and it always changes as the user changes things, so it's not what we want. It's really that. Okay, thank you. Bye bye.